Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Christ the royal master leads against the foe. Forward into battle, see his banner go. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. At the sign of triumph, Satan's host doth flee. On then, Christian soldiers, on to victory. Hell's foundations quiver at the shout of praise. Brothers, lift your voices, loud your anthems raise. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Verse 4. Onward then, ye people, join our happy throng. Blend with ours your voices in the triumph song. Glory, laud, and honor unto Christ the King. This through countless ages, men and angels sing. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Okay, and the next one, we're going to go to 485. Will I get in trouble if we don't stand up? Stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. Lift high his royal banner, it must not suffer loss. From victory unto victory, his army shall he lead, till every foe is vanquished, and Christ is Lord indeed. I knew I'd get in trouble at the house. All right, verse 2. Stand up for Jesus, the trumpet call obey. Forth to the mighty conflict in this his glorious day. Ye who are men now serve him against unnumbered foes. Let courage rise with danger, and strength to strength oppose. Verse 4. Stand up for Jesus, the strife will not be long. This day the noise of battle, the next the victor's song. To him who overcometh, a crown of life shall be. He with the King of glory shall reign eternally. And stay standing. Brother Bob, open us.
Picked some good songs tonight, Brother Ken. Those are good. I'll never forget one Sunday night singing that song. I was in college, and 5 or 6 of us had crammed into one of our friends' cars and come to church. Of course, Sunday night, I didn't have a car, so I always made sure I had somebody that was a friend. So you were going taking me to church, and so Sunday night we were all lined up on the front row, and our song leader happened to be one of our music professors at the college I was going to, and he announced, stand up for Jesus," and we were all sitting, and we just decided, we're going to stand up, and we did. We got scolded by our professor after that. He didn't think that our heart was right, though, but yes, it is hard to sit down singing that song. All right, well, Genesis chapter 25 and 26 is what we're looking at tonight. We're going to look at the story of Isaac this evening. Now, there are, from chapter 12 all the way to chapter 50 of Genesis, is really about 4 people, about the patriarchs, right? It's about Abraham, his son Isaac, Isaac's son Jacob, and Jacob's son Joseph. 38 chapters about 4 men. Each one of them has between 10 and 13 chapters except Isaac. Even though Isaac lives the longest of all of them, you know how many chapters are devoted to Isaac? 1. Just 1, chapter 26. But chapter 25 kind of leads into it. Chapter 25 tells us about the death of Abraham and about Abraham's other offspring and how Isaac is set up to be. He is the son of promise, and how Abraham sets that in place and makes sure that that's the case, that's adhered to when he's gone. Now, Abraham, last week we talked about Abraham buying the cave of Machpelah to bury his wife Sarah in, and I showed you that picture of how Herod had built that great wall around it. It's been 38 years, though. Abraham outlives Sarah by 38 years, and so he takes another wife, a concubine by the name of Keturah, and has 6 sons by her. Genesis 25 verse 1 says, "Then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bare him Zimram, Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua." And not only are the 6 sons mentioned, there are also 7 grandsons and 3 great-grandsons mentioned. Verse 3, it says, "Jokshan begat Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Asherim, and Letishim, and Lemamim." Verse 4, "And the sons of Midian, Ephah, and Epher, and Hanok, and Abidah, and Eldah. All these were the..." There we go. We'll just go back to this one. But Abraham makes very clear who the true heir is. Verse 5. "And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac." It belongs to Isaac. And he takes it a step further. Verse 6. "But unto the sons of the concubines, which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts, and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived, eastward unto the east country." So before he dies, he says, "I'm going to give you what I'm going to give you, and I'm sending you away." So when Abraham dies, there's no one there to contest the estate or to argue over the inheritance. They've all been given what they're given, and they've been sent away. So only Isaac is there when Abraham dies. Verse 7, "And these are the days and the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 115 years. Then Abraham gave up the ghost and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people." If you have a version that has the italics in there, you'll see that "of years" is in italics. That's something that the translators added in, thinking this is the meaning, but it's not in the original. Actually, it says he died of a good old age, an old man and full, and was gathered to his people. He died full. Now, verse 9. "And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre, the field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth. There was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. And Abraham's sons, his oldest son Ishmael, comes together with Isaac, and they bury Abraham together." So apparently they at least had at least the appearance of living in harmony at that point. Verse 11, "And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt by the well, Lahairoi." So God confirms his inheritance with Isaac, not just through money, but also through divine blessing. Verse 12 says, "Now these are the generations of," it speaks of Ishmael, "these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bare unto Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, and Kedar, and Abdiel, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, Hadar, and Tema, and Jeter, Naphish, and Kedema." Now, we read of his sons, then it also tells us their power. "These are the sons of Ishmael," verse 16. "These are their names by their towns, their castles, 12 princes according to the nations." So just like Abraham had 12 sons, Jacob has 12 sons of the 12 tribes, Ishmael has 12 sons and 12 tribes, they're princes. It speaks of their
their castles and their towns, and their possessions. Verse 17, and these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people. And they dwelt from Havilah unto Shur, that is before Egypt, as you go toward Assyria. And he died in the presence of all of his brethren. Now Ishmael's descendants lived in Shur as you go down to Egypt. Now remember, Egypt in Scripture represents the ways of the world, the people that are not walking with God. And Shur was that region when Moses led the Israelites across the Red Sea. They immediately went into the wilderness of Shur. That's that land that's right butts up against the land of Egypt, and that's where Ishmael's descendants were. In other words, Ishmael's people like to live for the things of the world, and that's really the kind of the theme that we're going to see here throughout these two chapters: is living for the world or living for God. Now, the rest of the chapter is about Isaac. Verse 19 says, and these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padanaram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. This is the first recording of twins. But they are not identical twins by any stretch of the imagination. They are as different as night and day. Verse 22, and the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. There's this struggle going on inside of her. She says, what's happening here? Verse 23, and the Lord said unto her, two nations are in your womb, two kinds of people shall be separated from your bowels. The one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. Now, we know there's Jacob and Esau, and Jacob the younger that is going to, his name changed to Israel, and his descendants the Israelites. Esau's descendants, the Edomites, who would serve the Israelites. But remember, we talked last week about the symbolism, this incredible symbolism of Isaac obviously representing the sacrifice of Jesus himself, the only begotten Son who was willing to lay down his life, and his bride, Rebekah, being who's the bride of if Abraham represents Jesus, and his bride would be who's the bride of Christ? It is the church. It's us, right? The followers of Christ. And just as she has this struggle within her, and God says, you've got two kinds of people at war inside of you. The truth is, even for us as the bride of Christ, we have two natures inside of us that are at war with one another, right? There's the ways of the world, and there's the ways of God, and there's this continual struggle between the ways of the world and of the flesh versus the ways of the Spirit and of God. Well, we continue on, verse 24. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first one came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. So it's been 20 years since the time he was married to the time now that his sons are born. Verse 27, and the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field. Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. Someone said that Esau was a man of the field, whereas Jacob was a man of the fold. Esau was the one who liked to go out and hunt and kill and drag something home. Jacob was much more content just to stay at home. He was more the pastoral, protective type. Verse 28, and Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Why was it that Isaac loved Esau? He was a man's man, but specifically, what was it about Esau that he was a man's man and he liked to hunt? What was it Isaac liked? He liked to eat the venison, right? Verse 28, Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And so the reason Isaac loves Esau is not because of who Esau is. He doesn't love him just because it's his son. He doesn't love him because he loves him because he likes what Esau can bring to him. He brings him fresh meat and fixes him stew. That's what Isaac likes about it. Esau represents very much the things of the world, the lusts of the flesh, the things that fill our belly rather than things that fill our spirit. Isaac loves Esau because Esau's bringing him venison. Rebekah loves Jacob simply because he's Jacob. The difference in this is very exposed in this next episode. Verse 29, and Jacob sowed pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. Of course, Esau's descendants, I mentioned, are the Edomites. Now, verse 31, and Jacob said, sell me this day your birthright. And Esau said, behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me? And Jacob said, swear to me this day. And he swore unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. He ate, he drank, and he got up and went away. Simple as that. He just sold his birthright. No big deal. He despised his birthright. It meant nothing to him. He was like, oh, I don't care about any of that. I just want my belly filled. Clovis Chappelle, old Methodist preacher, one time said that anybody could play the part of Esau in a play. All you need is a pot of red lentils and a coffin. And that's pretty much the life of Esau. That's what it amounted to. That's all the props you would need. He ate, he drank, he rose up, and he went on his way. You think about, he says any trained monkey could do that, right? When you think about Moses at the end of his life, he could look back and see people who had been freed. Paul could look back on his life and see the spread of the gospel. What could Esau look back on and see? An empty bowl. That was about what it amounted to. Well, Hebrews 12:16 tells us, lest there be therefore any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. He said, lest anybody be a fornicator or a profane person like Esau, who would give up his birthright for a morsel of meat, something to eat. You say, well, what does fornication and all, what on earth does that have to do with him selling his birthright for stew? Well, what does it go back to? It's fulfilling the desires of the flesh. He wanted something for his belly. It was his flesh wanted something. He has this desire, and he wants to fill it, and that's his focus. And that's what we find here. God says it's not about fulfilling the lusts of the flesh and the things of the world. It's rather focusing on the spiritual. He traded the eternal glory for something very temporary, for temporary passion. Literally, traded his future for a full belly at the present time. It's a terrible mistake to trade the future for temporary satisfaction, but that's what he did. The birthright, Jacob recognized, carried with it a double portion of the inheritance. Not only that, but the birthright, more importantly, it carried with it the family priesthood, if you will. You remember the Aaronic priesthood, the priesthood of Aaron set up in Leviticus, hasn't happened yet. So the promise of God to Abraham that I'm going to be with you, this promise in the covenant of Abraham goes through Isaac, and whoever gets the birthright gets the promise. That literally through him all the nations of the earth were going to be blessed. Jacob wanted that. Esau despised it. In other words, couldn't care less about it. Well, Abraham, we come to chapter 26, which is all about Isaac. Again, Isaac lives the longest of all of Abraham, his father, or of his son Jacob or grandson Joseph, but he gets this one chapter. The one thing we find in this chapter that kind of sets Isaac apart, Abraham was always known for altars. Everywhere he went, he built an altar. Jacob's going to be known for tents. Everywhere Jacob went, he lived in a tent. But Isaac is always associated with wells. In fact, the first time after he's offered on Mount Moriah as a sacrifice, the very next thing we read about him is in chapter 24, verse 62. It says, and Isaac came from the way of the well, Lahairoi, for he dwelt in the south country. Then it's by that same well that after Abraham dies, we read it just a moment ago, after Abraham dies, where does he go and live? He lives again by the well at Beer Lahairoi, there in chapter 25, verse 14. So there's this great connection with him with wells, and we'll see more about that in just a minute. But the whole point of Genesis from chapter 12 through chapter 50 is that God is calling out a special, unique, peculiar people, right? He calls Abraham out and says, I want you to leave your homeland, I want you to leave your family, I want you to go to a special place, and I'm going to make your descendants a peculiar or unique people. I want them to live differently than the world. I want them to be a witness to the world, that when people see you, I want them to see me. There's going to be a very special relationship between me and your descendants. He said, I want you to live different. I want you to raise up your children differently. I want you to train your children differently. Not only do I want you to train your children differently, I want you to make sure your children marry other people who are living apart from the world. You're to be a very special, unique people. Well, Patriarch Abraham is now gone. He's dead, he's passed away. So now the question is, will the family carry on? Will continue this relationship with God, and live uniquely amongst the world? Well, chapter 26, verse 1 says, there was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. If you remember, Abraham had done this also previously in time of famine. One time he went down to Egypt, to the Pharaoh. Another time he went down to the king of the Philistines, also known as Abimelech. Isaac now does the same thing. Verse 2, and the Lord appeared unto him and said, go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I will tell thee of. He says, don't go to Egypt. Don't do what your father Abraham did. Just stay in the land I'm showing you. Verse 3 says, sojourn in this land. And he gives him this sevenfold promise. I mean, this is wonderful. Watch what he does. He says, sojourn in this land, and I will be with you. That's one. I'm not going to leave you or forsake you. I'll be with you. I will bless you. That's two. And he says, for unto you and to your seed I will give all these countries. All this land is going to be yours and your descendants. That's three. Then he says, fourth, he says, I will perform the oath which I swore unto Abraham your father. I'm going to keep that oath with you. And then, verse 4, he says, and I will make your seed to multiply as the stars of heaven. There's five. And will give unto your seed all these countries. Your descendants will have these countries. That's six. And then seventhly, and in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And so he's given him this wonderful promise. And he gives him 5 reasons, and really it's based on Abraham's faithfulness. Verse 5, he says, because, here's the reason, because that Abraham obeyed my voice. So he does 5 things. He obeyed my voice and kept my charge. He kept my commandments, kept my statutes, and kept my laws. All 5 of those. He kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Now, is Isaac going to be obedient? Well, verse 6 says, and Isaac dwelt in Gerar. Now, remember what Egypt represents? It represents the ways of the world, right? You know where Gerar is? It's halfway to Egypt. God says, you stay in the land, trust me, I'm not going to leave you, I'm going to be with you, I'm going to multiply your seed, I'm going to keep the oath I gave to your father Abraham, I'm going to give you all this land and your descendants. He says, but don't go down to Egypt. So what does Isaac do? He did kind of like my children do. You know, we're mean to our children. We say, you keep your food in the kitchen, in the dining room, don't take it in the dinner, spill it. No reason to eat on the carpet. We're mean like that. So, but the kids invariably, they'll go fix them a bowl of ice cream or something, and they'll have it in their hands, and you know where they're headed. You say, don't you go in the den. And you know what they will do? If that speaker is the doorway to the den, they'll grin and they'll go, just like that, right? And they think that's really funny. But in reality, that's what we do, isn't it? So many times God will say, don't do this. He'll say, don't go past that line. And we'll go, okay. Won't we? Isn't that what we do so many times? God says, don't do this. How far is too far? Well, we don't go that far, but we'll just go this far. We'll just see how close to the edge we can get. And before we know it, we're going to fall off that cliff when we do that. But how often we say, well, we don't want to cross the line, but we'll see how close to the line that we can get. And that's what Isaac's doing here. He's kind of going, he's putting one step in the world and one step with God, one foot on each. The closer he gets to the world, the more he begins to act like the world. Verse 7, and when the men of the place asked him of his wife, he said, she is my sister. For he feared to say, she is my wife, lest, said he, the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. If you remember back in chapter 24, we talked about when Abraham's servant went to find her, he didn't just say she was fair to look upon, he said she was very fair to look upon. Now Isaac is afraid that they will do him harm and steal his wife. So he says, well, she's my sister. Now he's already messed up. You remember, God has told him to just sojourn in the land that I'm going to tell you. But if you look back in verse 6, it says, and Isaac dwelt in Gerar. Now, we talked about this last week. In fact, I think, sojourn just means you're just there temporarily. You're staying at the hotel for the night. That's to sojourn. Or you're staying, in a certain place for a week or for a month, but you're moving on. You're just sojourning. But he settles down. He dwells in Gerar. He hasn't learned from Abraham's experiences about lying about his wife, nor has he learned Lot's experiences about pitching your tent with the people of the world. He's making the same mistakes. Well, verse 8, it came to pass when he had been there a long time, so I mean he's settled down, he's planning to live here. When he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out at a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was sporting with Rebekah his wife. Now he realizes this is not something that a brother and sister would do. This is a little different. Now sporting, by the way, that word is sahak, which means to laugh or to play. It doesn't mean they were doing anything inappropriate in some public setting or anything. No, I mean it might have been as simple as he's tickling her ribs or doing something like that. Maybe picked her up and swung her around or something. But which would not be, if a husband reached over and tickled his wife's rib, or if a wife sticks her elbow in her husband's rib, you wouldn't think anything of that, right? But if a man goes around tickling other women's ribs, that would not be appropriate, right? So it's not that they were doing anything inappropriate for a married couple in public. It's just, it was clear. It's like, wait a minute, they've got a relationship that's not just, this isn't just friends here. So Abimelech's on to them. He knows this is a married couple. So verse 9, Abimelech called Isaac and said, Behold, of a surety she is your wife. And how said you, she is my sister? And Isaac said unto him, Because I said, lest I die for her. And Abimelech said, What is this you have done to us? One of the people might lightly have lied with your wife, and you should have brought guiltiness upon us. So again, just like the episode with Abraham, when Abraham had gone to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, this is probably that same Abimelech's son. Remember, Abimelech is simply the title, like Pharaoh or Caesar. Abimelech, my father is king. It's just the title of the Philistine kings. And so, again, he's following the same tradition that's gone on the generation before. All right, verse 11. And Abimelech charged all his people, saying, He that touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Now that seems to satisfy Isaac. He says, all right, I'm safe. I can say who my wife is now. Isn't it sad, though, that Isaac will trust the word of a king when he wouldn't trust the word of the King of Kings? When God said, just surely I'm going to take care of you. He's already given him the sevenfold promise. Everything's going to be well. I've got this taken care of. But Isaac didn't trust him. Verse 12, then Isaac sowed in that land. So he's still staying there in Gerar. Then Isaac sowed in that land and received in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. And the man waxed great and went forward and grew until he became very great. So he sows and he reaps 100-fold. Now you think about what that means. That's, anybody who invested in Apple stock, a year or two ago, they've done pretty well recently. On the stock splits, and I say, wow, looky there. If things go up 10%, you think, wow, this is, I'm getting a good return for my money. But imagine 100-fold, that's 10,000%. If you had invested in a company last year, and in a year's time it's gone up 10,000%, you would be hailed as a greater genius than Warren Buffett ever thought about being, right? I mean, 10,000%. And so the Philistines see this incredible blessing of Isaac, and they become very jealous. They're envious of what's happening. Verse 14, it says, For he had possession of flocks and possession of herds and great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. For all the wells which his father's servants had digged in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines had stopped them and filled them with the earth. And Abimelech said unto Isaac, Go from us, for you are much mightier than we. So they're afraid of him and filling in his wells with dirt and trying to cause him not to be so prosperous. Finally, Abimelech says, would you just leave? And so he moves on, and guess what he does? He digs more wells. Again, remember I said he was known for wells. If you had gone through the land of promise in the days after the patriarchs, it'd be kind of like walking around the family farm. You look over there and you'll say, Grandpa, what's that pile of rocks and stuff over there? Oh, well, that's where there used to be an old house place there. You come over and you say, Grandpa, there's daffodils out there in the middle of the field. How'd those get there? Oh, well, back in the 30s, my dad's brother moved in, built a little cabin there for a couple of years. And you say, well, Grandpa, what's that huge pile of rocks over there? Oh, well, that's where old Uncle Tom Varner, back around the turn of the century, he had his cornfield there, and that's all the rocks he pulled out of his cornfield over the years. And you see remnants of things that people had been there before. Well, if you were going through the land of promise after the patriarchs, you'd go all over and you'd see piles of rocks. You'd say, what's that? You say, Abraham's been here. He's built an altar there. And similarly, if you walked around that land, especially in southern Judah, you'd see wells everywhere. And you say, oh, that's where Isaac was. Years ago, Isaac's been here. He's dug him a well. Over and over, Isaac's digging wells. Well, verse 17, Isaac departed thence and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. And Isaac digged again the wells of water, which they had digged in the days of Abraham his father. For the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham. And he called their names after the names by which his father had called them. And Isaac's servants digged in the valley and found there a well of springing water. And the herdmen of Gerar did strive with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, the water is ours. And he called the name of the well Esek, because they strove with him. And they digged another well, and strove for that also. And he called its name Sitnah. And he removed from thence and digged another well, and for that they strove not. And he called the name of it Rehoboth. By the way, Rehoboth, there is still a place, Rehoboth is still there, and it still goes by the same name. I find that fascinating. After all these thousands of years and all the things that have taken place there, there's still a settlement there, and it's still called Rehoboth. But anyway, and he said, for now the Lord hath made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. So all three of these wells are all fought over. There's problems with the Philistines. The idea was when in that part of the world, it's so dry and barren. There's not enough rainfall really to grow your crops or to keep things going. So you would have to dig a well in order to keep your livestock watered. If you dug a well and you improved it, you're basically, it's kind of like a homesteader. You know, by the time you go out and you stake your claim and you build your farm and you planted your crops and you stayed there a year, you basically said, I've taken something that wasn't productive before and I've made it worth something, but because I have made it worth something, it's mine. It belongs to me. Well, that was kind of the idea there. He's gone out to a worthless piece of barren land. He's dug wells. He's made it prosper. But the Philistines don't recognize it. They won't hold to that. They don't honor that. So finally, Isaac just gives up being at home with the Philistines, and he finally leaves the land in the area of Gerar. And so verse 23, and he went up from thence to Beersheba. Now, Beersheba, if you remember, that was where already that Abraham had made a deal with the king of the Philistines. He said, look, if you take these 7 ewe lambs, you're accepting the fact that I've dug this well and this belongs to me. So he's going back to the place the Philistines have already acknowledged this belongs to the descendants of Abraham. So he finally leaves the Philistines, goes back to the land of promise. In fact, whenever in the Old Testament you read about the extents of the land of promise, it's always from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south. Beersheba was the southernmost settlement, if you will, of the Israelites. And so he's finally getting back into the land of promise. And once he does that, now God had blessed him materially back in Gerar amongst the Philistines. There's no doubt about it. God had blessed him financially beyond measure. But now that he's gotten out of the world, now that he gets back where he's supposed to be, God blesses him with something far more important than finances and material wealth. You know what he gives him? His presence. That relationship with God. Suddenly now God appears to him. Look at verse 24. And the Lord appeared unto him the same night. I mean, the same night that he gets out of the land of the Philistines and says, I'm getting into the land of promise where God told me to be, and I'm going to live for him. The very same night, God appears to him and said, I am the God of Abraham, your father. Fear not, for I am with you. The presence of God with him. I am with you and will bless you and will multiply your seed for my servant Abraham's sake. So he gets away from the world and God appears to him. And there's this progression. He gets away from the world, God appears to him, then he builds an altar. Now Abraham, his father's the one known for building altars, but it's interesting that as long as he's living in the world and doing, God's blessing him, everything's good materially. But once he gets away from the world, then he becomes much more concerned about spiritual things. And now he's building his altar, and he's focusing on his walk with the Lord, and God honors that. So the moment he takes a step in the right direction, he just starts going from strength to strength. Once he's got his momentum going that direction, he heads that way towards God. As long as he kept trying to partner with the world, God didn't appear to him. As soon as he steps aside, God comes. So what happens is now the relationship with God is no longer a business relationship, it's now a personal relationship. Yes, God had made a promise and there was a covenant, and God was blessing him down in Gerar. But now it's not just about business and keeping a covenant. It's now a personal walk with the Lord. It's this personal relationship that's coming out. Verse 25, and he built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. there Isaac's servants digged a well. Again, he's digging wells. Isaac had found a good place finally to raise his family. James Russell Lowell once said, he said, "You show me any 10 square miles outside of Christianity where a man's life is safe, where the purity of his wife is safe, where he can bring up his children decently." And he said, "And I'll immigrate there and give up my religion." To live in the world, you go into a place that is godless, without God, it is not go to atheist countries, go to the communist countries, and you see how much man's life is worth. You see how safe a woman's virtue is. You see how safe it is to raise your children in the ways of the Lord in places like that. It's not. Outside of Christianity, or outside of the ways of God, it's not. So Isaac's getting out of the world. He's getting away from the place that is apart from God. And he's just like the pilgrims who said, "We'd rather live in a harsh land and die, and at least be free to raise our families in the ways of the Lord." Well, the Philistine leaders, they see God's hand on Isaac, God's blessing, and they come calling. Verse 26. Then Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and Ahuzeth, one of his friends, and Phicol, the chief captain of his army. And Isaac said to them, "Wherefore come ye to me, seeing that you hate me, and have sent me away from you?" So it's pretty clear, they have not been good to him. They've hated him and said, "Get out of here," right? Verse 28, and they said, "We saw certainly that the Lord was with you, and we said, Let there be now an oath between us, even between us and thee, and let us make a covenant with thee, that you will do us no hurt, as we have not touched you, and as we have done unto thee nothing but good, and have sent thee away in peace. Thou art now the blessed of the Lord." Why, we've done nothing but good for you, and sent you away. Now, is that true? They've been filling up his wells with dirt. You know how much trouble it was to dig a well in those days? It's not like you had the cranes and the equipment to come out and just drill a shaft. I mean, this was an effort. They had very much tried to squander and hurt Isaac and to hold him back. God was blessing, but they were doing everything they could to keep Isaac from gaining financially. It kind of reminds you like what some politicians are today. "Oh, we're here for you, and we're here to take care of your liberties, and we're fighting for you." All the while they're taking your liberties away from you and putting onus restrictions on you and those kind of things. So Isaac's on to them, but he's going to be very gracious to them. He treats them with the utmost of grace. Verse 30, he made them a feast, and they did eat and drink. Now these are the very people who were filling in his wells and hindering him. Then verse 31, and they rose up betimes in the morning, and sware one to another. And Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. He feasted them, and he forgave them, but he did not want to have fellowship with them. He sent them away. He said, "Look, I was down there in your land. I know what it's like to live in the world. I got out of there. I've come back to the land of promise, and I don't want to maintain that fellowship with the world. I'm getting away from Egypt. I don't want to have one foot towards Egypt. I want to live for the Lord." James 4, verse 4 says, don't know you not that friendship with the world is enmity with God. Anybody who's a friend of the world is the enemy of God. This picture of saying, but we want to hang out with the world. We want to do the things the world's doing. We won't cross the line and do sin. We won't sin. We just want to kind of keep one foot here and one foot there. Isaac had learned his lesson. When God says, "Come out and be separate, be that unique, peculiar people, you and your descendants after you," Isaac, he had come to recognize it's the best way. God may bless me in the land, in the world. God may do all these things, and others may be jealous of me. But something far more important was the relationship with God, the presence of God in his life. Verse 32, and it came to pass that the same day that Isaac's servants came and told him concerning the well which they had digged, and said unto him, "We found water." And he called it Sheba. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba unto this day. So now whether he redug the well that Abraham had dug, or he digs another well in that area, but God's blessing him. He reestablishes the name there at Beersheba. All right, now verse 34, the last two verses here go back to Esau. It says, and Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mind unto Isaac and to Rebekah. He married two daughters. Remember, Jacob goes and marries a cousin from Haran. A couple of cousins, unfortunately, but he marries within his family, marries people who are set apart. Esau doesn't do that. Esau marries Hittite, pagan girls, and they are a grief to his parents, to Isaac and to Rebekah. And we'll see more about these two women when we get down to chapter 36. But it goes back to show you, Esau was not interested in the things of God. He was more interested in the things of the world. He'd rather have that pot of stew and despise the birthright. He'd rather have the cute Hittite girls than he would to go to the trouble of finding, just like his father had and as his brother does, to find someone who's part of that set-apart family, at least extended family. He goes back to that same picture. We start back in chapter 25 and we end chapter 26 with the same thing. There's the ways of the world and there's the ways of God. God's called us to be a set-apart, unique people, and to not try to live on the fence on one side or the other. Either be hot or cold, be right or wrong, but don't try to live in both worlds. We're in the world, but we are not of the world. Yes, we interact with the world. We reach out to the world. We do those things, but we are not to live like the world. People ought to look at us and know we're different than our neighbors that aren't in church and aren't walking with the Lord. They ought to see our children and say, maybe our children won't be perfect. I'm not saying that, but say, hey, those parents are doing things differently with their kids than we're doing with our kids. Those folks make sure their kids are in church. Those folks are making sure their children are learning about God. Those folks they're training their children to do things a little differently than we're doing. They're different than us. We ought to be that set-apart, unique, peculiar people. And unlike Isaac, it'd be wonderful if we didn't have to make the same mistakes as our fathers, and we learn from them, not go down that same road and say, yeah, but we're not going to cross the line. We're just going to stand right there. Where are we going to stand? Where will we stand? Will we stand toward the world? There's a lot of folks that go to church. They're not going to go down to Egypt, but they'll take one step. They'll get halfway there at Gerar. God's called us to be sold out, to be all in with Him, and to trust Him. He is the God who has promised. He is the God who is there. He's the God who said, I'll have a relationship with you. And as long as we keep one foot in the world, we're not going to have that intimate fellowship that we'll have if we'll say, yes, Lord, we belong to you. Would you pray with me? Father, I do thank you for the examples you've given us. All of these things are written as an example for us. You've told us in the New Testament. And I thank you for Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and so many lessons we learned from them. But we do thank you for this central theme in the life of Isaac as you focus on this one portion of Scripture just on his life and the picture of a man who you blessed, yes, but oh, how much you blessed him more with your presence when he got out of the world and started living for you. And I pray that you'd help us to follow the example of getting out of the world and just being faithful to you in all things. Not worrying about what the world thinks, if we're weird or strange or different. We ought to be different, and we ought to stand out. As the world around us is dark, we ought to be shining our light, and we ought to be noticed, not for our own glory, but for yours. We're living for you, that we're your special people. May we be faithful lights and faithful witnesses for you. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Time now for our invitation. There may be public decisions that need to be made. This is the time to make them. So would you stand up while Brother Ken comes to lead us? If you have a public decision to make, now's the time to come.
Turn to number 484, Higher Ground. I'm pressing on the upward way, new heights I'm gaining every day, still praying as I onward bound. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's tableland, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. My heart has no desire to stay where doubts arise and fears dismay, though some may dwell where these abound. My prayer, my aim is higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's tableland, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground.
Yeah, we're going to figure it out. It was right. Don't forget, I want to say one quick word before you leave tonight. Next Sunday night, we'll have regular worship services. We're going to do some special things with the Andersons, but don't forget, after the service, we're going to have a time of reception and just time of fellowship with them to send them off. That'll be their last Sunday evening with us before they leave to go on training and then move on to Texas. So be praying for them this week and their last week here in Richland, and praying for Micaiah and Nikolai and just the whole family and all that's going on there for them. Don't forget, we'll be back Wednesday night, prayer meeting, and all of our other activities as well. Let's pray as we're dismissed. Again, Father, we're thankful for another Sunday and time to be with your people and your house, and I thank you for those who've been so faithful to come and to worship and to set this day apart. Say this day belongs to Jesus, and to come and to worship you, and I pray that you would bless them for it. I pray, even if they didn't get anything out of anything the preacher said, or maybe a song that was sung, but just the fact that they've been faithful to you, I pray that you would honor them and bless them for it. I do pray that you'd help us as we go from this place to remember who we are, that we are your children. We're part of your family. We're called out to be your ambassadors in this world. And so help us to be that set-apart people this week, and to not to be obnoxious set apart, not to be the better-than-you kind of folks, but rather that we would be the ones who are genuinely showing forth your love and your grace and your mercy and what you can do to change a person's life. And I pray that you'd help us to show forth that light and that love this week, that people may see our good works and glorify you, our Father in heaven. Use us for your honor and glory. We ask in